Good morning, all of you. I welcome you all to Ansarkari. So, in this video, we'll be taking the important articles for 8th of February 2023. So, majorly, we'll be talking about the trade deals between India and Russia and their payments in Indian rupee. Apart from that, the requirement of oil, and when we talk about transition towards clean energy. Thirdly, we'll be having a look at the missing voters, specifically the younger generation and living in urban areas. So Supreme Court declines to take up the pleas against the elevating lawyer. Yesterday we discussed this issue that there's a lawyer whose name was recommended to be appointed as a judge in the Madras High Court, and later on petitions were filed against her, accusing her of hate speech against minorities. And today we are seeing that the Supreme Court bench says that it cannot give a judicial direction to the collegium on the lawyer's appointment, and she would be taking the oath as additional judge in the Madras High Court. So Justice Sanjeev Khanna says that assuming that the collegium did not take everything into account may not be a proper thing, and we cannot go into the question of her suitability. So we cannot direct the collegium to reconsider the appointment because that recommendation has already been approved by the central government. Then coming to the OBC reservation and specifically about the non-creamy layer. So the creamy layer, they are the ones who are having enough amount of financial resources, who are earning sufficient amount of money above the limit that has been set under this reservation. So that is the creamy layer, and creamy layer does not enjoy the benefits of reservation. So here we see that the Supreme Court, again, it is saying that the existing limit to fix the OBC non-creamy layer, it is enough, and there are no requirements needed to change that limit. So currently, an annual income of both the parents of rupees 8 lakh or more, it excludes the OBCs from availing the benefits under this reservation. So the income limit is rupees 8 lakh. And we see that the death toll, it surpasses 6,000, as we see that Turkey and Syria seeks these survivors. And it was massively hit by it was hit by a massive earthquake of magnitude of around 7.8 on the Richter scale. So here the geography of this area becomes important for us. Like, you should be knowing about the countries who are bordering the Mediterranean Sea and location of Turkey and Syria and any like water body around it. There is a Sea of Galilee, so you can locate that on the map also. So the geography is very important, and apart from that, from the context of earthquake also, you can find out some facts which can be asked in prelims regarding the Mercalli scale and the Richter scale, and about the epicenter and things like that. So talking about the inclusion of around 484 companies, they were made a part of the Gender Equality Index, which is calculated by Bloomberg. So Bloomberg, it has selected around 500 companies for the 2023 Bloomberg Gender Equality Index from around 600 companies as recognition of the progress they have made in promoting gender inclusion and implementing diversity policies. So 9 Indian companies have made it to this index. So that is there, and those 9 companies includes Dr. Reddy's Laboratories, First Source Solutions, HCL Technologies, Hero Motocorp, and likewise. So for gender equality index members, the companies led by women, they have higher representation of women at all the levels. And the member companies with greater than 30% women representation on the board have on average 27% of the women executives, within the corporation, as compared to 20% of the women executives in the firms, with less than 30% of women on board. So this is one of the trend. So specifically, when we talk about gender equality in IT companies or in MNCs, we see the major problem is regarding the glass ceiling and even sexual harassment. So you can find out about what are the steps taken in regard to this situation. There is one step regarding a she box creation and creation of a committee in every company or every MNC to deal with cases related to sexual harassment. Coming to the editorial page, so we know that Pakistan is going through an economic crisis. So there is like crisis and the resilience, there is political trouble also, and there are like terrorist organizations are getting more active in the region. So we are seeing that this time that Pakistan, obviously, it is seeking help from IMF. So in that context, this is 23rd agreement with the IMF, which is in itself a cause of grave concern for Pakistan. And inflation is at around 28%, which is very high, which is highest in almost 5 decades. Pakistani rupee has lost 17% of its value in 7 days only, and it is edging around. Pakistani rupee's value is around 300 for $1. Foreign exchange reserves, they stand near $3 billion only, which is not even enough for a month's imports. So, with severe import restrictions and constraints and the inability to pay in the foreign currency, economists they've already declared Pakistan to be in partial default. So the economic crisis has only been made worse due to misgovernance and ineptitude enveloped in hubris over the last 4 years there. And now there is total political confrontation between the political parties. So first, like it is divided between two groups. Firstly, between the Shehbaz Sharif-led multi-party coalition, that is the Pakistan Democratic Movement, and the ousted and the belligerent former Prime Minister Imran Khan. So they are under confrontation. And talking about the terrorist activity, so we are seeing Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan is getting more activated after the Taliban came to power in Afghanistan. So we can say on economic front, on security front, and even on the political front, the situation is unstable in Pakistan. Then talking about fiscal consolidation, and this is obviously it becomes important for our economy for the stability and growth. So the budget has twin fundamental goals or twin objectives of growth and stability. So these two things they need to be taken forward together. They need to work in tandem and move ahead simultaneously as we progress towards being a developed country. So talking about the budgetary support to growth, so growth is affected by the size of the government expenditure, how much government plans to spend, and also on its revenue, because the expenditure would depend upon the government's revenue, its income, and also how much out of like the total expenditure, how much of it is the capital expenditure. So all these things form and they affect the rate of growth and the size of growth also. So increase in the central's capital expenditure, it is budgeted at 37%, while that in revenue expenditure is only 1.2%. So this is a positive step that we are focusing and we are spending more on creation of more capital assets, and the size of revenue expenditure is low. Then multiplier associated with the central government's capital expenditure is 2.45. So that is there. So more is the capital expenditure, more would be the, we can say, positive benefits out of it in diverse sectors like in investment, in job creation, in increase in income, and increase in aggregate demand by the consumers, which would be further fueling up the production. So this would start a virtuous cycle in the economy, aiding the growth. And the state's capital expenditures, they may also increase as a result of central grants to these states, which were meant for the capital asset creation, amounting to 1.2% of the GDP. And growth may also be stimulated indirectly due to an increase in the private disposable incomes following the tax slab adjustment. So the tax slabs have been also readjusted under the new income tax regime, and this, it is believed, would be helping in increasing the private disposable incomes. So here, disposable income means whatever income is left after paying the taxes. So that becomes your disposable income that you can spend to satisfy your own needs. And talking about FRBM Act, that is the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, and the external conditions that were cited as a reason. Basically, when we talk about the fiscal deficit to GDP ratio and what were the targets set under this act. So this act was amended in 2018, and the center is mandated to take appropriate steps to limit its fiscal deficit to 3% of the GDP by 31st March 2021. Although because of COVID-19 pandemic, we were not able to meet this target. So right now, the act, it also mandated a target to the center's fiscal deficit to GDP ratio that should have been brought down to 40%, but right now it is somewhere around 85%. So the medium term fiscal policy, come the fiscal policy strategy statement. So the government, it has attributed the deviation of the budgeted 5.9% fiscal deficit to GDP ratio to the external economic conditions. And for this reason, the center it has also not provided the medium term GDP growth forecast. So furthermore, the center, it has also not indicated the year by which it envisages reaching a fiscal deficit level of 3% of the GDP. So the central government, it has not cited a proper timeline to reduce its fiscal deficit target of 3% of the GDP. So instead, it has indicated that the level of fiscal deficit is going to be 4.5% of the GDP by 2025-26. And talking about the private investment, so for raising the growth in the medium term, augmentation of private investment relative to the GDP needs to be ensured. So here, the article is talking about if the government would be spending more and more, so it is possible that it might lead to crowding out of the private investment, but obviously that is not in favor of increase in growth. So at present, the total investable resources consisting of the financial savings of the household sector amounting to about 8% of the GDP, and the net foreign capital inflows amounting to 2.5% of the GDP, that may be estimated at 10.5% of the GDP. So that might somewhere help in increasing the private investment. So we need a stronger fiscal consolidation roadmap over the medium term. So obviously we should have a proper plan and need to ensure that that is effectively implemented. Because obviously when we have a proper plan, a proper vision, how we are going to move ahead in future and what all changes are required after proper analysis and scientific assessment of the data, only then we can achieve and we can say that we can quickly achieve our target of being $5 trillion economy and being a developed country by 2047. Then neglecting the health sector, it has consequences. So given the learnings or the drawbacks that were highlighted by the COVID-19 pandemic in our health sector, despite that, we are seeing that the health sector has not been focused much on in this current budget. And India needs an infusion of resources and a bold imagination to address the problems of the health sector. So, when we look at the data of the National Family Health Survey 5, it shows that among children aged below 5 years, 35.5% they were stunted and 32.1% were underweight. And yet the allocations for the education and the nutrition, they are stagnant, and the budget for the midday meals that have also been reduced by 9%, which was not taken into account inflation also. So there is growing disease burden with non-communicable diseases spreading. We have mental health problems. We have geriatric care adding to the load of the communicable diseases. So India lacks adequate human resources, infrastructure, and access to affordable diagnosis and treatment. And talking about the things that were highlighted during the COVID-19 pandemic, specifically in our health sector. So it sharply brought into focus three major fault lines. First was the lack of financial risk protection. Secondly, a broken down primary health system, particularly in the North India, that resulted in a large number of avoidable deaths. And thirdly, the absence of well-equipped and functioning district hospitals to cope with the demand. So besides it also showed us the chaotic state of the regulatory framework also. So all these things were highlighted, but these were missing in the budget 2023-24. Then talking about the missing voters, so around 30 crore missing voters, they are mostly young, urban, or they are migrants. So when we talk about the migrants, so a new initiative, that is remote electronic voting machines, are coming up to ensure that the migrants are able to cast their vote. But what about the young and the urban population? So with a voter turnout of 67.1% in the 2019 Lok Sabha polls, India was ranked 74th among the 162 countries that were analyzed. And having a look at the data, when we compare it with different countries, we see that this chart, it is showing the voter turnout percentage of the countries in their latest elections. So India had a voter turnout of around 67%. So Bangladesh had more than India. Bangladesh and Brazil, they had a higher voter turnout than India, and the countries like Pakistan, Russia, and Nepal had a less voter turnout. Then loan apps, they are indulging in predatory lending as per the Enforcement Directorate. So they are like basically tricking in people, and be aware of this thing that you don't have to get tricked through these loan apps. And so we see that shares of Adani Enterprises, they have rebounded, and however, the volatility still remains. Then the issue between USA and China over this spy balloon. You can have a look at it in this picture. So that's how it looked. And this is the possible, its estimated trajectory, how it traveled from China to USA. So this is the red line showing its path. And one important information, that there is an Aleutian Islands, which is located off the coast of Alaska in the Pacific Ocean. So Aleutian Islands, again, the geography of this region is very important. And USA shot this balloon down, saying that it was a spy balloon of China. And you can have a look through this graph that it flies at around a height of, you can see, 80,000 to 1,20,000 feet. And that is there. Apart from this, so what are spy balloons? Spy balloons, they are high altitude surveillance tools that usually operate at 80,000 to 1,20,000 feet, well above the cruising altitude of the commercial aircraft. So commercial aircrafts, they fly at a higher height of around 12,000 meters. So these spy balloons, they gather intelligence and they carry out other military missions. Then typically a spy balloon, it is equipped with cameras and imaging devices suspended beneath the gas-filled white object to capture things of interest. So that is what is a spy balloon is. And apart from that, Taiwan, it has also accused the People's Liberation Army of using the spy balloons in the past. So such spy balloons, they've also been spotted over Asia and even Andamans. And so the tensions between US and China, they are growing. So what has the union budget allocated to the minorities? So the union budget, this year's union budget, it came with a reduction of 38% in funds for the Ministry of Minority Affairs. And the worst affected scheme under the all-encompassing fund crunch was the education scheme for the madrasas. And apart from that, another scheme which suffered the most was the skill development initiative among the minorities. So talking about Nai Udan, so Nai Udan scheme, it was meant to help the minority students prepare for the Union Public Service Commission examinations. That was grounded. So it was argued that the scheme overlaps with other similar affirmative plans of the government. And then there was Hamari, the Rohar scheme for conservation of minorities, culture and heritage, which got rupees 2 crores earlier. It is now down to only rupees 10 lakhs. Then the skill development initiative amongst minorities was given a lower allocation, funds for Nai Manzil an integrated educational and livelihood scheme. It was also brought down, upgrading the skills and training in the traditional arts and crafts for the development scheme, which is Ustad. Again, it was allocated lower amount of monetary allocation. So there was, we can see, lower amount of allocation for these schemes meant for the welfare of the minorities. And so what are CAR T cell therapy? So this is the next step towards the holistic treatment of cancer. So firstly, you should be knowing that this therapy is related to treatment of cancer. So cancer, it is a disease which constantly evolves to evade treatment. And we need to keep developing more sophisticated therapies with a few side effects are they are possible. And a new development on this front, holding the attention of many researchers worldwide, is again this CAR T cell therapy. So three major forms of treatment for any cancer includes a surgery where you can remove the cancer. There is radiotherapy, which is delivering the ionizing radiation to the tumor. And thirdly, there is systematic therapy. So here, administering the medicines that act on the tumor. So these are three possible treatments for cancer. And so how has this systematic therapy evolved? Systematic therapy's earliest form was chemotherapy, and when administered, it preferentially acts on the cancer cells because of the latter's rapid, unregulated growth and poor healing mechanisms. So chemotherapeutic drugs, they have modest response rates and significant side effects as they affect the numerous cell types in the body. So the side effects of chemotherapy, there are many side effects, and so talking about CAR T cells, which stands for the chimeric antigen receptor T cell therapies, they represent a quantum leap in the sophistication of the cancer treatment. So unlike the chemotherapy or the immunotherapy, which require mass-produced injectable or oral medication, here the T cell therapies, they use a patient's own cells in treating the cancer. So these T cells, they are modified in the laboratory to activate the T cells and which is a component of the immune cells to attack such tumors. So that's how it is different and it becomes important because here we require less amount of medicines, then obviously the side effects would also be lesser in amount. So these modified cells, then they are infused back into the patient's bloodstream after conditioning them to multiply more effectively. And the cells, they are even more specific than targeted agents. And they directly activate the patient's immune system against cancer, making the treatment more clinically effective. So this is why they are called living drugs. So all this is very important regarding the CAR T cell therapy, much more effective, I hope less painful, and they're also called the living drugs. So they, in a way, they like the modified and the activated T cells, they are inserted into the patient's body and they start multiplying and they start attacking the tumor, which is there inside the body. So apart from this, so where else is it used? So as of today, this therapy, it has been approved for leukemias, which is cancers arising from the cells that produce white blood cells. So leukemia is a blood cancer. Then also in treating the lymphomas, which is arising from the lymphatic system. And these cancers, they occur through the unregulated reproduction of a single clone of cells that is following the cancerous transformation of a single type of cell. It produces millions of identical copies, and that's how there is cancer inside the bodies. So that is another important information regarding this. So these CAR T cell therapy, it has shown results, particularly in patients whose tumors have recurred or they have evaded multiple lines of treatment. So it has been found to be much more effective compared to other treatments in case of cancer. So cancer constantly evolves to evade the treatment. Similarly, we also need to keep developing more sophisticated therapies with as few side effects as possible. And cell therapies hold this promise and will also help us understand this dreaded disease and its complexities better. So we can say kind of a tool where we can help and save multiple lives through these T cell therapy. Then India is providing relief to Turkey and Syria. They thank India for the rescue teams and the aid that we have sent them. So India and Russia, we continue a discussion to evolve a payment mechanism, basically, which is going to be through a Vostro account. So Vostro accounts would be basically using the Indian rupee in terms of the payments and will not be depending upon the dollars. So the countries, they deliberate on the payments in third currencies and on sourcing from India as potential solutions to disruptions due to the Western sanctions. So we'll be able to surpass the Western sanctions also when it comes to trade between India and Russia. So apart from that, let me have a look if there is something important from this article. So Russia was shut out from the global SWIFT system for the monetary transfers. So India and Russia, they have agreed to conduct the payments through the rupee ruble arrangements, and however this has led to an accumulation of the Indian rupees in the Russian banks. So given the large volume of payments that we have, so in Russian banks we are seeing high accumulation of rupees. So this is where both the sides, they are discussing a way to enhance the Russian sourcing from India. So as of now, there is no proposal for quota for the transgender people, and quota in terms of basically in the educational institutions and in the employment sector. So this should be there if obviously we lack the representation and we can say the role and enrollment of transgender population in the educational institutions and even in the employment sector. They are not accepted socially also. So we have that kind of mindset when it comes to transgender population, but they must be openly welcomed and accepted because ultimately they are humans. Then in the parliament again, this Hindenburg issue, Adani group of companies are under focus. So obviously opposition is targeting the government. So Turkey, Syria earthquakes, they remind Prime Minister of the Bhuj tragedy that we saw. So as I told you that even in India, like we lie in a highly seismic and sensitive zone when it comes to the earthquakes. So it becomes important that we are properly prepared to handle any kind of disaster in future. Then left-wing extremism related to violence, it came down by 76% in 2022. So our Home Minister says that this violence came down by 76% as compared to 2010, and owing to the center's three-pronged strategy. So what is that three-pronged strategy which showed such wonderful results? Was a resolute approach to curb the extremist violence, better coordination with the affected states, and development through the public participation. So these three aspects, these three components of this strategy showed us results. So I'll repeat it again. Resolute approach to curb extremist violence. Secondly, better coordination with the affected states. Thirdly, development through public participation. So obviously, when public participates, so the trust between the government and the public, that increases. So Saudi Arabia has to say that oil is still needed while the world transitions to clean energy systems. Definitely that is true, because in that transition process, obviously we'll be requiring oil. We can't completely end our dependence upon that. So energy security is very important in energy transition. So we can't unplug the current system before we have built the new one. And this is what the COP28 president designate has to say, pushing for investment in decarbonization. So we need to get more concessional finance to the vulnerable communities around the world to lower the risk, attract more private finance. So this year's COP28 of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, it would be hosted by UAE, so which holds one of the world's largest oil and gas reserves. So he said that the world's energy transition must be inclusive and deliver a fair deal to global south, a term for developing countries that includes both India and UAE. So India and UAE are part of global south. So basically the countries lying below the equator. And apart from that, they are mostly developing in nature. So obviously that needs to be there needs to be a just energy transition which is justified and which is equal for all the developing countries specifically. Then coming to the world page, so there is violence going on between Israel and Palestine, Israel, West Bank, and to find out where does Hamas work, then find out Sea of Galilee. So you need to locate all these things on map. These are very important points, and you should be completely aware about this region. And we see sub-Saharan Africa is the new epicenter of extremism as per United Nations. So people are increasingly joining because of economic factors. And there's an increase of 92% of new recruits to the extremist groups. They are joining for better livelihoods, according to the UNDP report. So there is growing violent Islamic extremism in sub-Saharan Africa. So arms supplies are causing unpredictable escalation. This is what the Russia's defense minister has to say, given the backdrop of Russia-Ukraine war going on. So Ukraine is being supplied by advanced weapons by the NATO countries, specifically US and Germany. So that is basically kind of escalating the war further. So coming to the business page. So there is easing core inflation. It curbs the need to lift the rate. So the core inflation is easing down. However, it is kind of sticky in nature. We don't see much fluctuation or movement when it comes to core inflation. So here you should be clear with the meaning of what is actually core inflation. So here core inflation, it does not include the food inflation and the fuel inflation. So that's why it is much more stable and not volatile. And so we see that the S&P Global Ratings on Tuesday said that the core inflation in India had been declining sequentially, and an elevated 6.25% policy rate limits the need for further rate increases. So the repo rate was increased further, and the Reserve Bank of India, it has raised the short-term lending rates by 225 basis points since May last year to contain inflation, so which was mostly driven by the external factors, the supply side factors, especially the global supply chain disruptions following the Russia-Ukraine war breakout. So we had a monetary policy committee meeting yesterday, and so that is there. And then exposure to the Adani won't hit the bank ratings. So every bank has to say that they are in a safer territory as of now, and there is not much of issue regarding to the exposure to the Adani group of companies they have. Then energy security is no longer global. So Rosneft, which is there is no unified global energy market, and the energy security is no longer global. Russia's powerful oil executive is to say. And so speaking at India's Energy Week, he says that all the principles of the market trading have been destroyed, and the market pricing and the contract law, it was abolished. So Russia was slapped over the sanctions by the Western countries following the Russia-Ukraine war. Some countries in Europe, they stopped buying the contracted natural gas from Russia, and Russian crude, it was traded at discounts as high as $40 per barrel. And obviously, we know that India has leveraged this opportunity by increasing its amount of crude imports from Russia. So our share has increased from 1% to 28%. And green energy switch must be affordable. So obviously, when we are talking about transition to clean and green energy, that must be affordable enough so that everyone can like use it at an affordable rate, and that need not be a burden on the common man. So India, the world's third largest oil consumer, said that it is committed to energy transition, but surviving the present and the cushioning the vulnerable from the volatilities is essential before moving to the clean and green energy. So all these things must be taken together. We cannot just just be talking about clean energy, clean energy, and clean energy. So we need to take into account that the vulnerable population is not affected because of the price volatilities. So that needs to be made stable. And obviously, we need to swiftly shift to clean energy apart from a sudden shift towards that, because obviously, our energy demand would also double by 2030. So energy transition with energy security is the key thing. And India has a target of being a net zero carbon emission country by 2070. So repeatedly emphasize that dirty fuels like oil and coal, on which the economy is two-thirds dependent, will have to be in use in the foreseeable future. So that would be in use in the future as well. But like 2 days ago, we also talked about increasing our efficiency in the coal sector, how the coal power plants can be set up, and they need the only such coal plants needs to be functional who are situated along a coal mine, so that the transportation cost is not incurred, and that would make the electricity and the power generated to the thermal power plants much more affordable. So that is what Union Minister Hardeep Puri Singh has to say. So that is it from the Hindu. We'll take a Financial Express. So Google unveils artificial intelligence service Bard. Its answer to ChatGPT. So I hope you are aware about what is ChatGPT, a artificial intelligence tool where it can perform such tasks which can be performed by humans. So Bard seeks to combine the breadth of the world's knowledge with the power, intelligence, and creativity of our large language models. It draws on information from the web to provide fresh, high quality responses. So again, our oil minister on energy transition, he says that unless we survive the present, we'll not be able to go into the world of clean and green energy. We have to make sure our transition entails surviving the present and cushioning the vulnerable from volatility. So increase in rice procurement, and Punjab sees a low procurement. So we see that brisk procurement allays the concerns over the government's rice stocks. So that is there. So UN Secretary General says that rights are key. As we look to priorities for this year, a rights rooted approach is central to achieving our ultimate priority, that is a safer, more peaceful, more sustainable world. So rights are very important. So as we were talking about Bard, which is going to be the Google's own artificial intelligence chatbot, on similar lines as ChatGPT. So this is again a Google's competitor to it. So what is Bard? It is a Google's own artificial intelligence chatbot. It is based on Lambda, and so it was termed as an experimental conversational artificial intelligence service, and said that Google will be opening it up to the trusted testers ahead of making it widely available. So so is it going to be better than ChatGPT? So running these models requires significant computing power. Obviously, advanced computers are required for that. And for instance, ChatGPT, it is powered by Microsoft's Azure's cloud services. So the service runs into errors at times. So when too many people access it, it runs into errors. And Google says that it will look at external feedback along with the internal testing to make sure that Bard's responses meet a high bar for quality, safety, and groundedness in the real world information. So that's it for today. Thank you for joining Ansarkari. You'll get the PDF link in the description box. And if you find the video useful, if you find the analysis helpful, please do not forget to subscribe to our channel, hit the like button for this video, and share it as much as possible. Thank you so much for joining us today.